My sense is there's a whole lot of people in the church who, maybe it's a small percentage, maybe 5, 10, 20%, who don't believe anymore, but who just stay in as a semi-believer or as a non-believer. So did you try that? For how long? And what was that like for you to do that? To kind of remain in the church after you no longer believed fully?
Yes, I did do that. I don't know how many years I would say that was. Our path was so varied here, where
it was like 13 or 14 years.
and within that time, we exposed our kids to other churches. We didn't attend. We attended loosely. So what I would say is, yes, I did try that, and it worked while it worked. So in ways that it worked was, at one point, our kids wanted to go and wanted to affiliate. And so it really worked during that time to go to sacrament meeting or to support them. That felt very good because my buy-in was less and I was there supporting my children. What I do remember is personally, so just for me and my journey, there was a time when I could sit and I could listen. And then there was a time when I felt like it became expensive. It became emotionally expensive. And the way I knew that was I would come home and I would be grouchy or I would feel exhausted after attending. And I literally would have the thought of, I really wish I'd gone for a walk instead. I really wish I'd done something else with my time. And that was the time that I knew that I should probably do something different.
Was it ever hard to just talk about what it was like to be at church when you didn't believe, when it was hard?
So being at church when it was hard was like you practicing compassionate listening and patience and being able to hold a lot of different opinions from you and never being able to speak your own because they couldn't offer the thing that you were being expected to offer. And
meaning they couldn't compassionately listen to you like you were compassionately
right. Like if I offered an honest point of view about something or a different way of seeing it, it would have supercharged the room and made the atmosphere, it would have just changed the atmosphere because, those lessons are like a train. They're on a destination, And if you say anything too different or too honest, it sends the train can't handle it. And they try to get back to the track, just sort of, and it's very shaming and it's very uncomfortable to be that voice, honestly. And it has never really been my style to try and make a whole bunch of people uncomfortable, So then you're placed in this no-win position where you're fighting against yourself because you feel like for your integrity you should say something, right? But at the same time, you can't in that structure say something. It's not safe. And, I tend to respect people and not want to disturb people knowingly. So it's just, it turns to a place where it's like, I'm not sure these people are my people anymore. I'm not sure this is my place anymore. I just feel different.
Do you ever remember hearing things taught that offended you? Or hearing about things your children were taught that offended you or worried you about them being taught? If so, talk about some stories there.
All I can say that I remember is that we got to a point where our children would come home and share what they liked about a lesson and what they didn't around the Sabbath table.
Any examples?
So
Second Coming.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, so in Young Women's, oftentimes that would be a triggering point for our daughters because, of course, we have a mixed family where some people go, some people don't. And so those lessons are highly traumatizing. So during that time, we would shift it to say, what do you believe about that? Why do you think you were uncomfortable during that lesson? And offering support when our children would feel much the same way as we, saying, but I couldn't just say that. I couldn't, and I feel hushed all the time. And I feel so... I feel like that's when we started navigating that their voice was important, that they should actually pay attention to their own voices amidst, and it wasn't so much that church was designed to tell them what to believe, but in fact to offer all this exposure to ideas to further their development as to, like, I feel like I can take that and I don't want anything to do with that. And we did that for a time. It worked for a time for them.
Do you remember Maya and Noah in the Ark?
So that was very young. She was like 3 or 4. That was in Seattle, and Maya came to us very young and said, I'm not sure about this. I don't know about this. We used to read the illustrated scriptures were very consistent about a spiritual thought in the morning before people went on with their day. And we had read the Noah's Ark story, and she, as a young girl, said, now, God loved the earth. God made the earth, and right? And then God created the animals, right? And God created the people, right? And then God killed all the people and all the animals. And it was this, just her innocent way of thinking through, like, how does God behave? Like, is that how, do I want that concept of God? That was something that I remember in that moment. We allowed for and supported her having that feeling and having that, question.
Do you remember them worrying about Uncle Scott?
So
after coming home from church?
When we were in Seattle, one of my closest humans, my cousin Scott, came out to us, me first, as gay, in a very traumatic way. He is one of the most peaceful, loving, just absolutely non-harming people. And as he described his tumult, trauma, wanting to end his life, years and years of suffering, trying to have it not be so, I felt completely agonized for him. And in that moment, I remember offering him my love and my support and thanking him for telling me. And that really affected our family because all of us loved him. And so it's those intimate connections, I think, that just sort of shift us enough where, then those church lessons or when we're exposed to ideas about, LGBTQ youth, or it's different. It just becomes personal then. And that was true with our kids. It became very personal, and they became very upset at any sort of derogatory speech, judgmental speech around it. They just wanted to love inherently.
Remember the time the kids came home with the worksheet with all the different ways people would die during the second coming who weren't members?
Yeah.
And tying that to Uncle Scott?
Yep. And my brothers.
Talk about that? Yeah, you want to talk about that?
And my brothers.
Just tell that story.
So they had been studying the second coming and came home with this worksheet and were really emotionally distraught. They were younger still, and I remember them really, really being angry about it and really worried about it, that they had flashes in their eyes of all the people they love who aren't LDS and them dying these horrible deaths and seeing it. And That was another time where we had to go bigger, go meta, and say, what do you believe about God with relation to this? And, go a little bit deeper.
Was there a point that you remember when you just said, we can't stay anymore? If so, when was that time?
So you and I never decided that for our children. I feel like we experimented. So we had experimental periods where there was a time when we did not go to church and we tried other things. We went to a Quaker, Church Catholic, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Unitarian, and we did that for a time. But what we found was socially structured, our community, the way it was structured and the way our kids' personalities worked, that they felt they, at different times, wanted to go back. And what we found at that time was we were rarely on the same page. Do you remember that? Like we would have some kids wanting to go, other kids not wanting to go. And so during that time, we were really careful to embrace the unconditional love model and to support their journeys. And that meant if one person was going to church, then John or I would go so that they never had to sit alone in sacrament meeting. And that was true up to the point of excommunication. Our daughters were, I feel like both of our daughters were in young women presidency for their classes, positions.
So do you remember a point where you just said, we can't do this anymore?
I remember a point for myself where I felt like I will be taking no new information. If I'm going to support my children, it is to support my children, but I am now emotionally separated from this institution in this process. But we didn't try to overly convince our children of that, though I do remember some discussions where you would discuss seminary lessons, things they were learning in seminary, trying to clarify information, false information versus, and that was hard. Those were challenging conversations.
So when did you decide to leave for good?
It feels like at the time of the letter of excommunication, we were going to church once or twice a month to sacrament meeting with volleying kids. And that is where we were up to the point of the letter. We were still going. I was still going to sort of support kids. So fairly recent. The letter changed. I stopped going pretty quickly after the letter.
Why?
So there was the letter, and then we met with the stake president, as I recall. And between those two happenings,